He buried his son today, or so he thought. While the church still smelled of lilies and grief, his daughter-in-law Megan wasn't at the funeral. She was thousands of miles away, smiling in a bikini, holding a margarita under the blazing Cancun sun. Her caption, "Enjoy life while you can." The kind of cruelty that makes your blood boil. The kind that turns sorrow into something sharp. As he stared at that photo, one thought took root. Something about his son's death didn't feel real. And when his phone buzzed that night, it proved it. Subscribe for part 2 and comment where you're watching from. He stood beside the closed casket, the scent of lilies clinging to the air like a lie. The room was full, yet it felt hollow, as if everyone had gathered to mourn a ghost instead of a man. The mahogany box gleamed under the dim light, polished to perfection, but it held nothing of his son, not his laughter, not his warmth, not the gentle humor that once filled every silence. The empty chair in the front row stared back at him, a gaping wound in a day already bleeding with sorrow. That chair was meant for her, his son's wife, the woman who had promised to love and honor until death. Instead, her absence sat there heavy and deliberate, like a silent declaration of victory. Murmurs floated around him, whispers too careful to be called voices. "Where is Megan?" One woman asked, her tone coated with sympathy that wasn't real. "It's a shame, such a young widow." The man beside her nodded, eyes downcast in feigned respect. But he could feel it. The quiet judgment, the pity that cut deeper than grief. They didn't know her. They hadn't seen what he'd seen, the way she had smiled too easily, spoken too smoothly, controlled every moment of his son's life with a polished touch and a cold heart. He remembered the last family dinner before it all fell apart. Megan had worn a soft pink dress, her perfume expensive and invasive, filling every inch of the room. His son Ryan had sat beside her shoulders, hunched like a boy being scolded in his own home. He had tried to share a story about his early days in accounting, about integrity and hard work, about how every number told a truth if you knew where to look. Megan had laughed then, light, tinkling, and cruel. "Oh, James," she'd said, placing a manicured hand on Ryan's arm. "You make life sound like a spreadsheet. My husband is a visionary, not a bookkeeper." The memory stung now like fresh salt in an open wound. Even then, she'd been rewriting the script, reducing Ryan's achievements to a footnote in her performance. And he had let her. That realization hurt more than the funeral itself, the thought that his son had died believing she loved him. The pastor spoke words meant to soothe, but they slid off him like rain on glass. Condolences came and went, hands shook and faces blurred. Every word was a repetition of the same hollow sound: loss, peace, rest. But there was no peace here. There was only the echo of the empty chair and the suffocating weight of unanswered questions. When the service ended, he stayed behind as the others drifted away. The casket loomed before him, dark and unyielding. He rested his hand on it, feeling the coolness of the wood seep into his palm. "I'm sorry, son," he whispered, voice cracking under the strain of holding back tears that refused to fall. The silence that followed wasn't sacred. It was heavy, wrong, distorted. It was as if the air itself knew something was off. He glanced toward the doorway where the funeral director stood, waiting to close the room. The man gave a polite nod, the kind professionals give when they've seen too much grief to feel it anymore. James nodded back, but his mind was elsewhere. There had been no autopsy, no request for an open casket. Megan had insisted it was too painful, that Ryan wouldn't have wanted people to see him that way. She'd signed the papers for immediate cremation, efficient and cold. Too efficient. Too cold. As he walked out into the fading afternoon light, he felt the chill that comes when a truth hides in plain sight. The sky was the dull color of pewter, and a light rain began to fall, tapping against the black umbrella someone had left behind. He didn't take it. He let the rain soak through his jacket, through the grief, through everything he couldn't understand. Each drop felt like a reminder that something wasn't over. The drive home was a blur. Streets he'd known for decades passed by like strangers, their houses glowing with the soft domestic light of lives untouched by loss. At every stoplight he found his thoughts circling back to that image. The empty seat, the absence that had felt too deliberate to be grief. When he reached his house, the air inside felt stale, lifeless. He poured himself a drink not out of habit, but necessity. The glass trembled in his hand as he sat down in his worn leather chair, the one that still creaked the same way it had when Ryan was a boy. He used to sit on his lap and ask questions about numbers, about how things worked, about the world. Everything has a pattern, Dad, Ryan used to say wide-eyed. You just have to find it. Now the pattern was staring back at him, and it didn't make sense. He looked around the living room at the framed photographs on the mantel. Ryan and Megan on their wedding day, her smile practiced his genuine. Another photo taken on the porch of the lake house, Ryan's arm around his father's shoulder, sunlight catching in his hair. James reached out and touched the frame. The cold glass met his fingertips like a warning. Outside, thunder rolled low across the horizon. The storm was building, but inside another storm had already begun. Every instinct he'd spent a lifetime trusting told him something was wrong. Not just with Megan, but with everything surrounding his son's death. He picked up his phone, scrolling through contacts without really seeing them. His eyes stopped on Ryan's name. He knew it was useless, but his thumb hovered over the screen anyway. He almost called just to hear the automated voice say, "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Maybe the finality would help. Maybe it wouldn't. The phone buzzed, then vibrating against his hand. For a moment he thought it was another condolence text, another empty string of words like "praying for you" or "stay strong." But when he looked down, his breath caught. It was from a number he knew better than his own. Ryan. The screen glowed in the dark room, 6 simple words that cut through his exhaustion like a knife. "Dad, come to my house. Now." His pulse thundered in his ears. His first thought was madness, some cruel prank, some heartless glitch of modern life. But another part of him, buried deep and still raw, whispered something else. What if it wasn't? He stood up too quickly, the glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. The sound echoed through the empty house, sharp and final. The clock on the mantel ticked once, twice, as if keeping time with his racing heart. He didn't even grab his coat. He just grabbed his keys and walked out into the storm. The rain came harder now, washing the streets clean of their quiet suburban calm. Headlights cut through the downpour, illuminating the familiar road to Ryan's house. He knew every turn, every bend, but tonight it all felt foreign, each shadow, each flickering streetlight, a threat. By the time he pulled into the driveway, his hands were slick with rain and sweat. Megan's white SUV sat gleaming under the carport water, sliding off it in silver streaks. The sight of it made his stomach twist. He stared at the house, every window dark except for one faint light flickering in the kitchen. For a long moment he couldn't move. He sat there, engine idling, heart pounding like a drumbeat in his chest. The text replayed in his mind, those 6 impossible words. When he finally stepped out, the rain hit him like cold needles. He walked to the door, reached into his pocket, and pulled out the spare key his son had given him years ago. Just in case, Dad, Ryan had said, smiling. He'd never used it until now. The key slid into the lock, hesitated, then turned with a soft click. The sound echoed in the silent street. He pushed the door open, stepping into the darkness that smelled faintly of perfume and deceit. The air was still too still, as if the house itself were holding its breath. His footsteps were soft on the rug, every creak of the floorboards magnified by the silence. Then he saw the light in the kitchen, warm and steady. A shadow moved, and when his eyes adjusted, he froze. Because sitting at the kitchen island, alive, whole, and looking straight at him was his son. The breath left his body in a single ragged exhale. Relief, disbelief, and terror collided all at once. And before he could speak, his son did. "Dad," Ryan said quietly, "we need to talk." He looked at his son, now alive but hollow-eyed, sitting in the dim kitchen like a ghost pulled back from the grave. The light above the sink hummed softly, a low mechanical buzz filling the silence between them. Ryan's hands trembled as he reached for his coffee cup, but it wasn't coffee. The scent of whiskey cut through the air, sharp and familiar. His father, James, said nothing. He just stood there, soaked from the rain, studying the sun he had buried in his mind only hours ago. The quiet stretched until it hurt. Then Ryan looked up and the truth began to unravel. "Dad." "I didn't die," he said. "She made it look that way." His voice cracked at the edges, raw from sleepless nights and fear too heavy to name. James sat down across from him, the leather of his jacket squeaking against the chair. "Start from the beginning," he said. Ryan rubbed his face with both hands. "You remember how she was, how she liked things, controlled. Everything had to be perfect. Every dinner, every photo, every word." His father nodded slowly. How could he forget? He remembered the first dinner he had at their house after they married. The table had been set like a magazine spread, wine glasses lined in perfect symmetry, napkins folded into sharp triangles, candles that didn't drip. Megan had floated around the table, smiling too wide, speaking in that tone people used when they wanted to seem effortless but were calculating every move. "Ryan, honey," she'd said that night, "maybe your dad could use some advice about retirement planning. He's still doing construction, right?" She'd said it sweetly, almost innocently, but her eyes had held that spark of quiet mockery. Ryan had laughed it off, poured his father more wine, and changed the subject. But James had seen it then, the way her hand rested possessively on Ryan's arm, the way she leaned in whenever he spoke, steering him like a driver correcting a drifting wheel. Back in the kitchen now, Ryan's voice grew hoarse. At first it was small things. "She changed my phone password, said it was for security. She started handling the bills, said I was too busy. She made me close my old accounts, merge everything. It felt normal at first. I thought she was just organized. Then it became something else." He looked up, eyes glassy. "She started telling me where I could go, who I could see. She'd make up reasons to keep me home, fake illnesses, made up emergencies, anything to make me choose her over everyone else. Even you." James felt the weight of those words land like a stone. He remembered the messages left unanswered, the birthdays skipped, the visits that never happened. Each one had stung, but he told himself Ryan was busy, married, finding his way. He hadn't realized he was being erased from his son's life piece by piece. "She said you didn't like her." Ryan continued, his hands gripping the cup so hard his knuckles whitened. "Said you thought she wasn't good enough. She'd cry, twist things around. I started to believe her." His voice broke on the last word, and James saw the boy beneath the man, the same boy who used to bring home drawings from school, the one who used to believe his father could fix anything. The house creaked in the wind outside, a low groan like an old ship straining against its ropes. James leaned back, watching his son crumble under memories he hadn't been strong enough to face alone. One night, Ryan said, staring into the glass in front of him, "I came home late from work. There was a man in the living room. She said he was an insurance agent. He had papers, contracts. They were talking about life insurance, mine. She made me sign things without reading them. Said it was for her peace of mind." James's jaw tightened. "And you signed them?" Ryan nodded slowly. "I was tired. I didn't think she'd—" His words trailed off. "After that, she started asking questions about the lake house, about your will, about what happens to property after someone dies." James's pulse hammered in his chest. He thought of the empty chair at the funeral, the photo of her drinking on a beach while the coffin sat before him. Now the pieces aligned into a pattern that made him sick. "She didn't just fake your death," James said quietly. "She planned it." Ryan's silence was answer enough. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. James got up and walked to the window. The street was dark, slick with rain, the reflection of the porch light rippling like a heartbeat. Behind him, Ryan spoke again, his voice a whisper. "I found out a week ago. About the other man, about the money. She'd been moving everything into her name for months. The night before the crash, she asked me to go check the car, said she heard a noise in the engine. When I opened the hood, I found the brake line half cut." James turned sharply. "You're telling me she tried to kill you?" Ryan nodded. "I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it had to be an accident. But then I found her text messages. She didn't even delete them. He pulled out his phone, scrolled, and handed it over. James read the screen. The words were simple, almost casual. "Once the paperwork clears, I'm free. He'll be gone and we'll have everything." For a moment neither spoke. The refrigerator hummed softly. Rain tapped against the glass like restless fingers. James set the phone down. "You should have gone to the police." "I did," Ryan said. "But she's smart. She's been covering her tracks. The fake death was her way out, her way to cash in before anyone noticed. She thought the crash and the fire would take care of everything." James turned back toward him, eyes narrowing. "Then how did you get out?" Ryan's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Luck. Or maybe she underestimated me. I switched cars that night. I took hers instead of mine. When the explosion happened, she thought I was inside." James exhaled long and low, the kind of breath that carries years of fury and disbelief. "She's still out there," he said. Ryan nodded. "And she thinks I'm dead." They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the revelation pressing down like a storm front. Then James spoke, voice calm but sharp as broken glass. "You can't run from her. Not anymore." Ryan looked up. "What do you mean?" James reached for his coat, his expression steady cold. "You said she wanted everything. Fine, we'll give it to her." Ryan frowned, confused, but there was a glint in his father's eyes, a quiet fury wrapped in precision. It was the same look he'd had years ago on the construction site when something went wrong, when he had to tear down a wall just to rebuild it stronger. "You and I," James said, buttoning his coat, "we're going to make her believe she's won. And when she's comfortable, when she's certain the world is hers, that's when it all falls apart." Ryan's heartbeat quickened. "Dad, you're talking about revenge." James turned toward the door, his voice low but unwavering. "No," he said. "I'm talking about justice." The rain outside had stopped, leaving behind the clean, heavy quiet that follows a storm. But in that stillness something had shifted. The father who had walked into that house grieving had disappeared. What remained was a man with a purpose and a plan. And as he stepped out into the night, his mind already building the blueprint, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: Megan wouldn't see it coming. The storm outside had passed, but inside James's chest something darker was brewing. The kitchen still smelled faintly of burnt coffee and wet clothes. Ryan had gone upstairs to rest, leaving his father alone with the kind of silence that hums when truth has torn something wide open. He sat at the table, staring at the small puddle forming beneath his coffee cup, the amber light flickering above him like a pulse. His phone buzzed once, sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet. The name on the screen made him blink. It was Mark Turner, an old friend he hadn't spoken to in months. He opened the message. Just one image. The glow from the phone painted his face pale blue as the picture loaded. Megan stood on a white sand beach, sun-high, waves glittering behind her. A wide straw hat tilted just enough to cast a shadow over her eyes, but not her smile, that same polished, photogenic grin she'd always used when she wanted something. Her arm was wrapped around a man he didn't recognize, tall, younger, tan shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest. In her hand, a drink shimmered with crushed ice and lime condensation trailing down the glass. The caption beneath the photo stopped him cold. "Enjoy life while you can." He didn't breathe for a few seconds. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each sound a nail in the coffin she'd built around his son's name. His thumb tightened around the phone until his knuckles blanched. He zoomed in. Behind her, half buried in the sand, was a red and white hotel umbrella. The logo was familiar: Boca Vista Resort, Miami. The rage didn't come fast. It crawled up slowly, steady, quiet, the way fire eats through dry timber before anyone smells the smoke. He saved the photo, then looked again. Her necklace caught the light, the same one Ryan had given her on their second anniversary, a simple gold chain with a tiny diamond pendant. He remembered helping his son pick it out. Remembered the pride in Ryan's voice when he said, "She'll love it, Dad. She deserves something that lasts." James leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. He stared at the photo until his eyes stung. Every pixel was an insult, every smile a confession. The woman who had orchestrated his son's death was toasting the sun wrapped around her next conquest, proud enough to broadcast her freedom. He hit call. Mark answered on the second ring. Jim, the voice, said low and cautious. "Did you see it?" "I saw it. I thought you should know. She posted it publicly, then deleted it an hour later. But not before half the internet saw it." James swallowed hard. "When?" "About 6 hours ago. I've got a buddy down in Miami. He said she's been staying at Boca Vista for days. Checked in under the name M. Hollis. Same initials, fake last name. She's not even hiding well." James's jaw tightened. "Send me everything." "You sure about that?" Mark asked quietly. "You're not going to like what else she's been doing." "Send it." James repeated, his voice flat. Within minutes, another file arrived. Dozens of photos, receipts, tagged locations. Megan in a white sundress at a rooftop bar. Megan laughing with the same man, his arms slung across her waist. Megan boarding a yacht called Serenity Now. Every image was time-stamped after the funeral, after the world had supposedly lost her husband. He put the phone down carefully, almost gently, like it might explode if he let it slip. His mind was no longer fogged with grief, it was sharp, precise. He saw every lie she'd told, every calculated move. She hadn't just killed Ryan. She'd erased him, replaced him with a story she could sell to whoever came next. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. He heard Ryan pacing, restless even in exhaustion. James glanced toward the stairs but didn't call out. There were some truths his son wasn't ready to see yet, not until the trap was ready. He walked to the cabinet, pulled out a folder from the bottom drawer. Inside were papers he hadn't touched in years, bank statements, property deeds, old insurance documents. He started flipping through them, his mind mapping out connections faster than his hands could move. Megan had always been clever about money, but she wasn't infallible. Somewhere she'd left a trail. When he reached the back of the folder, he stopped. A letter from the insurance company dated 2 months ago. He unfolded it slowly. It was addressed to Ryan and Megan, jointly confirming a policy increase, a massive one approved under Ryan's digital signature. He'd seen enough contracts in his life to recognize a forged sign. The slant, the spacing, it wasn't Ryan's. He felt the air leave his lungs in a slow, controlled exhale. She'd planned every step. The policy, the accident, the cremation request. She hadn't even bothered to wait a full week before disappearing into her new life. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Mark. "One more thing. My buddy spotted her tonight. Said she's not alone. She's meeting a man named Caldwell. Financial advisor. Looks like she's transferring funds." James closed his eyes. The image of her laughing burned behind his eyelids like a scar. "Enjoy life while you can," she'd said. Fine. Let her enjoy it. For now. He stood and moved to the window. The storm had washed everything clean, the street, the trees, even the sky. But his reflection in the glass looked nothing like the man who'd buried his son that morning. This version was colder, clearer, the quiet kind of dangerous that doesn't need to shout. He grabbed his phone and opened a new message to his son upstairs. "Get some sleep. We leave at dawn." He didn't say where. He didn't need to. He turned off the lights, leaving the kitchen in darkness, except for the faint glow of the phone screen still showing the last image of Megan on the beach. For a moment he almost felt pity, a fleeting trace of what used to be empathy, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She had taken his son's trust, his family's name, his peace, and turned it into her currency. Now she would pay for it. Outside, the first trace of dawn crept along the horizon, the world caught between night and morning. James stood in the half-light, the photo still open in his hand, the hum of vengeance steady in his chest. He slipped the phone into his pocket, reached for his jacket, and stepped outside into the cold, silent air. The plan was already forming clear as blueprints on fresh paper. By the time the sun rose over Miami, she would never see it coming. The photo of Megan laughing on the beach replayed in James's mind long after the screen went dark. He sat in his car, parked beneath the dim glow of the streetlight, staring at the reflection in the windshield. The face of a man hollowed out by rage, but held together by control. The night was still unnaturally quiet, as if the whole world had paused just to watch him unravel. The phone lay on the passenger seat. Black screen turned away, but its weight felt heavier than the gunmetal key in his hand. He should have driven home. He should have tried to sleep. Instead, he sat there, haunted by the image of his son's coffin, the empty chair, the lies that had stacked themselves into a mountain too steep to climb. He turned the ignition, the engine humming low. Maybe driving would silence the noise in his head. He pulled onto the road, the rain-slick asphalt reflecting the dull orange of the streetlights. His thoughts tangled like loose wires, insurance-forged signatures. Megan's smile, the other man. Each image flickered through his mind until the edges blurred. He was so deep inside that chaos that when the sound came, it took him a moment to recognize it. A single buzz, then another. The phone lit up, vibrating across the seat. He glanced down, half expecting Mark again, maybe another update, another photo. But what he saw instead made his chest tighten until he could barely breathe. Ryan. The name glowed in the dark like a ghostly echo. For a second he thought it was a mistake, some leftover contact syncing glitch, a cruel algorithm scraping data from an old thread. But then the message appeared. "Dad, come to my house. Now." His hands froze on the wheel. The car rolled to a stop in the middle of the empty road, tires hissing against the wet pavement. His heart pounded so loud it drowned out the sound of rain tapping against the windshield. He stared at the message until it blurred. It couldn't be real. His son's phone had been destroyed in the crash. They'd told him that. They'd told him everything had burned. Another buzz. "Please, hurry." He didn't think. He didn't breathe. His instincts overruled logic. He slammed the car into gear and turned toward Ryan's neighborhood. The tires screeched as he accelerated through the rain, the wipers thrashing in rhythm with his pulse. The streets grew narrower, darker. Every shadow looked alive. The houses loomed like silhouettes, their windows glowing faintly behind curtains. He could almost hear Ryan's voice in his head, calm and steady as it used to be. "You worry too much, Dad. Everything's fine." But nothing was fine. The GPS wasn't needed. He'd driven this route too many times when Ryan first moved in, proud of the house, proud of the life he'd built. Now, as James turned onto the familiar cul-de-sac, a chill crawled up his spine. The house was dark. No cars in the driveway, no porch light. Just the faint flicker of something behind the curtains. Maybe candlelight, maybe a trick of the rain. He parked at the curb, engine still running, headlights cutting across the front yard. For a long moment he didn't move. His rational mind whispered that it was impossible, that someone was playing him, but the part of him that refused to give up, the part that had built homes from dust and raised a boy from nothing, pushed back. He stepped out into the rain. The air was thick, electric, heavy with the scent of wet earth and memory. His shoes sank into the mud as he walked up the path past the rose bushes Ryan had planted himself. They were overgrown now, wild. At the door his hand hovered above the handle. The wood looked darker than usual, the brass knob cold and slick. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the spare key. The metal slipped once before sliding into place. Click. The door opened with a groan. The air inside smelled faintly of smoke and something else, salt maybe, or old perfume. He called out, voice low, unsteady. "Ryan." No answer. Only the hum of the refrigerator somewhere deeper in the house. He stepped inside, leaving muddy footprints on the hardwood floor. The living room was just as he remembered it, yet wrong in small, unsettling ways. A picture frame lay face down on the table. A chair was slightly turned toward the window. A jacket hung on the back of the couch that didn't belong to Ryan. He took another step, heart hammering. Then from the kitchen, a sound. A faint creak. "Ryan," he said again, louder this time. His voice echoed through the empty house. He reached for the light switch, but the power flickered, then steadied into a weak yellow glow. The hallway stretched ahead long and silent. Another sound, the unmistakable scrape of a chair leg. He moved toward it, pulse quickening. As he turned the corner into the kitchen, his breath caught in his throat. There, sitting at the table, was his son. Alive. Ryan looked thinner, paler, his hair damp and disheveled, but his eyes were unmistakable. Wide alert, haunted. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a memory. He was breathing. "Dad," he whispered. For a long moment neither of them spoke. James felt the room tilt, his knees almost giving way. He wanted to reach out to touch his son's face to make sure he was real, but the fear of losing the illusion froze him in place. How he managed to say. Ryan looked down at his hands, trembling slightly. "I can't explain everything right now," he said. "But I need you to listen." His voice was cracked, tired, like it had been used to scream and never healed. "I wasn't supposed to survive." She thought she'd finished it, but she was wrong. James sank into the chair across from him, staring, trying to piece together something that made sense. "Megan," he said quietly. Ryan nodded once. "She thinks I'm dead." Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but deliberate, like the world itself was listening. James swallowed hard. His throat burned from holding in everything he wanted to say. Then what now? Ryan's eyes flicked toward the window. Now he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "We finish what she started." The words hung between them, heavy, dangerous, and strangely certain. James leaned back, the edge of realization cutting through the disbelief. He looked at his son, alive, trembling, defiant, and knew the message hadn't been a mistake. It was a call to arms. Upstairs a floorboard creaked. Both men turned their heads. Ryan's expression hardened. "We're not alone," he whispered. James's hand instinctively went to the drawer beside the counter where Ryan had always kept a small revolver, an old family relic. He opened it slowly. The weight of the weapon felt cold, grounding, real. The next sound came from the back door, a faint click, like a lock giving way. James met his son's eyes. Neither of them moved for a heartbeat. Then Ryan stood calm but steady, nodding once toward the hallway. Whatever waited on the other side of that door, the illusion of grief was gone. The fear was gone. What remained between them was something far stronger, something sharpened by betrayal and bound by blood. And as James took his first quiet step toward the sound, he realized the impossible had already happened once that night. The rest, no matter how dangerous, no longer felt impossible at all. The sound from the back door didn't come again. For a long time the two men stood in that narrow kitchen, the air charged and waiting. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, a low vibration beneath their rapid breathing. James held the revolver steady, the weight of it both alien and familiar, like shaking hands with an old ghost. Ryan watched him with wide, bloodshot eyes, a man suspended between panic and determination. When the quiet held, James finally spoke, his voice low. "Tell me everything." Ryan sank into the chair, his shoulders sagging as though the act of sitting carried more weight than his body could bear. He rubbed his temples, fingers trembling. "You're not going to believe half of it. Try me." Ryan looked up, his face pale under the flickering light. "She planned it all, Dad. The accident, the insurance, the getaway. Everything." The words hit like a blunt weapon. James didn't move, didn't blink. He simply waited, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Ryan drew in a long, unsteady breath. "She told me she'd booked us a weekend trip, a surprise. Said she wanted to fix things, that we'd lost touch. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I wanted to believe her." He let out a hollow laugh, the kind that breaks before it even starts. "We drove out past the city toward the lake road, the same one you and Mom used to take me fishing on." James felt something twist inside his chest, a memory poisoned by new meaning. "She said she needed air," Ryan continued. "We stopped near the overlook. I got out to stretch, and that's when she kissed me. It felt strange, rehearsed. Then she said she forgot her phone in the car. When I turned around, she was holding the keys. I didn't even have time to ask what was wrong before she started the engine. His hands tightened into fists on the table. She drove off the edge, Dad. With my car. It exploded before it hit the rocks. She'd swapped my things into it earlier. My wallet, my watch, my phone. Everything that could identify me. James exhaled slowly, each word scraping against his throat. And she made it look like you were inside. Ryan nodded, his voice barely a whisper. She told the cops I'd been drinking, that I'd lost control. She played the grieving widow perfectly. And then she took the money. How much? $500,000, Ryan said. Payout cleared 3 days after the funeral. James's knuckles whitened around the gun handle. The number didn't surprise him. What did was the calmness with which she'd done it, the precision of it all. It wasn't rage that filled him now. It was something colder, slower, like steel cooling into shape. She didn't stop there, Ryan said, pulling his phone from his pocket. The screen was cracked, the glass spiderwebbed. I got these last week. Bank transfers. She moved the money to a new account in the Cayman Islands. The name she used, Marissa Hollis. Same alias she checked into the hotel with. James remembered the beach photo, the smile, the man beside her. The lover, he said flatly. Ryan's lips twitched. Caldwell, her financial advisor. He helped her move the money, scrubbed her records. She promised him a share, but she'll burn him too. She always does. The refrigerator kicked on again, loud and jarring in the stillness. James set the revolver down on the counter. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Ryan's voice cracked. Because I didn't know who I could trust. I didn't even know if she'd come after you. I've been hiding for weeks trying to figure out what to do. I thought if I stayed dead long enough, she'd get comfortable. But when I saw the beach photos, I knew she'd moved on. She thinks she's safe now. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His son looked years older than he remembered, the weight of betrayal hollowing him out. He saw exhaustion in the slump of his shoulders, fear in every blink. But beneath it all, he saw something else, resolve. Ryan, he said quietly, this isn't about running anymore. I know. She's not going to stop until we stop her. Ryan's eyes lifted to meet his father's, and for the first time since the funeral, there was fire there. Then we stop her. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. James stood and crossed to the cabinet. He pulled out a notepad and pen, his movements deliberate. We start with her money trail, every account, every alias. We make her believe everything's still working, insurance intact, estate untouched. Then we close the walls around her. Ryan watched as his father wrote each line of ink, carving the shape of vengeance. You've done this before, he said quietly. James didn't look up. Not like this. A thunderclap rattled the windows and a burst of light filled the room, throwing sharp shadows across the floor. When it faded, James looked older, harder, the kind of man who'd already decided how the story would end. Ryan took another shaky breath. Dad, there's something else. James paused, pen hovering above the page. What Ryan hesitated, eyes darting toward the door as if the truth might break it open. She wasn't alone that night. Someone else knew. Someone helped her set it up. She called him before we left for the lake. I heard the name once, Reed. She said he'd take care of everything. Reed, who I don't know. But she trusts him. More than Caldwell, more than anyone. James stared at the rain streaking down the window. Then that's where we start. Ryan leaned back, exhaustion pulling at him. You're not afraid of her. James's voice was steady. Fears for people who still have something to lose. For a while they sat in silence, father and son reunited not by love, but by the wreckage of it. The air between them was thick with the hum of electricity and vengeance. Then James stood, picking up the revolver again. He checked the cylinder, reloaded, and slid it into his jacket pocket. You get some rest, he said. Tomorrow we find Reed. Ryan looked up, half protesting. Dad, what are you going to do? James opened the door, rain whispering against his face. What a father should have done a long time ago. The door closed softly behind him. Outside, the storm had calmed, but the world still smelled of thunder, of something brewing, waiting. James walked down the empty street, past the dark houses and the whispering trees, his steps steady and deliberate. Every move had a purpose now. The night was no longer about grief. It was about justice disguised as fate. And by the time the sun rose, someone was going to learn that the dead don't always stay buried. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of light that makes everything look like a memory. James sat at the kitchen table, the half-empty coffee mug growing cold beside him. Ryan was asleep upstairs, his first real rest in weeks, though even that sleep sounded uneasy, the kind that came with clenched fists and shallow breaths. James stared at the condensation on the window, watching the slow trail of water slide down the glass. The night's revelations had burned away the last trace of grief. What replaced it was clear and cold, a steady kind of purpose that didn't shout. It planned. He reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a number he hadn't dialed in years. Jessica Moore. Once a friend, once a regular at their family barbecues, now a respected attorney with a reputation for winning cases no one else would touch. She'd been there when Ryan was born, had held him in her arms, and joked that he had cross-examiner eyes. The irony wasn't lost on him. He hesitated for only a moment before pressing call. She answered on the third ring, her voice sharp, familiar, and awake. "James Harper. I was wondering when I'd hear from you again." He could almost hear the smile under her words. "I need your help, Jess." There was a pause, a shift in tone. What kind of help? The kind that starts with fraud and ends with attempted murder. Another pause. "Where are you, Ryan's house?" "Your son's house." "James?" "He's alive." For a long moment there was only the faint crackle of static. Then quietly, "I'm on my way." When she arrived an hour later, the sky had begun to clear, the storm clouds breaking apart like old secrets giving up their hold. Jessica stepped out of her car heels, clicking on the wet pavement, her trench coat flaring behind her like the closing argument of a courtroom she'd already won. James met her at the door, looking older but steady. Inside, Ryan sat at the table, pale but awake, his eyes wary. Jessica froze when she saw him. "Jesus, Ryan," she whispered. "I went to your funeral." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "So did I." They sat, and for the next hour the kitchen became a courtroom of its own. Ryan laid everything out, every lie, every forged document, every bank transfer Megan had made under a different name. Jessica listened without interrupting, her sharp eyes moving between them, her mind already running through the law like an engine revving in silence. When Ryan finished, Jessica exhaled slowly and leaned back. "It's bad," she said, "but not impossible." James's voice was calm. "I'm not interested in revenge, Jess. I want her cornered. No noise, no mistakes." Jessica nodded. "Then we need to make her think she's still in control. Keep her moving the money. Keep her believing you're both gone from the picture. We'll track the transfers, find the legal cracks, and when the time's right, we hit her all at once." Ryan frowned. "Can we really prove what she did?" Jessica's eyes hardened. "With the right trail, yes. Financial fraud, falsified documents, insurance deception, and conspiracy to commit murder. You don't just win a case like that, you bury her under it." James leaned forward, his gaze unflinching. "How long will it take?" Jessica smiled faintly. "Depends on how fast you're willing to play her game." That night the house transformed into a war room. Jessica spread papers across the table, bank statements, property deeds, copies of emails she'd already subpoenaed through quiet channels. Ryan sat opposite her, his laptop open, tracing Megan's digital footprints, while James stood at the counter, arms crossed, the quiet commander overseeing the operation. They discovered that Megan hadn't just stolen money, she'd built an empire of deceit. Offshore accounts, shell companies, fake trusts, all registered under variations of her new name. Caldwell, her supposed lover, had helped her hide it, but his greed had left fingerprints everywhere. "She's sloppy now," Jessica said, tapping a document with her pen. The kind of confidence that comes right before collapse. That's our window. James poured her another cup of coffee. Then let's break it wide open. As the hours bled into dawn, a new energy filled the room. The grief that had haunted them turned into momentum. Each clue uncovered was a nail in the coffin of her freedom. Ryan's exhaustion began to lift, replaced by something like focus. He worked with his father in sync, each move deliberate. At one point, Ryan paused, glancing at his father. "You ever think we'd be sitting here planning this?" James gave a quiet laugh, the first real one in months. "I always thought I'd be teaching you how to build something, not tear it down. But sometimes the only way to rebuild is to burn the rotten part first." Jessica looked up from her notes. Poetic James. "Let's make sure the fire's legal." By mid-morning they had a plan. Jessica would file a quiet claim through her firm under Ryan's name, alive, legal, and documented. Once the claim entered the federal system, Megan's forged death certificate would trigger an investigation. At the same time, James and Ryan would track Caldwell, baiting him into revealing the final transfer from the insurance fund. "Once that happens," Jessica said, sliding her folder shut, "we go public. The moment she tries to access another account, the IRS, the bank, and the feds will all be waiting." James nodded slowly, eyes sharp, and her partner Jessica gave a knowing smile. "We'll make sure he's there too. Let him think it's business as usual until the handcuffs click." Ryan leaned back, a quiet relief spreading through him. "So we don't confront her?" "No," James said. "We outthink her." Jessica gathered her files, tucking them neatly into her bag. "You'll need to stay off the grid for now," she said to Ryan. "She still believes you're dead. Keep it that way." He nodded. "What about you?" "I'll be fine," she said with a half-smile. "I've handled worse snakes in suits." When she left, the sun was breaking through streaks of gold, cutting through the gray. James watched her car disappear down the road, then turned back to Ryan. "You trust her?" Ryan asked quietly. "I do," James said. "She's the one person who never owed me anything and still showed up when it mattered." For the first time in weeks, Ryan smiled. "Then we've got a fighting chance." James looked at the clock. It was just past noon. Somewhere far from them, Megan was probably laughing again, sipping something sweet and expensive, believing she'd escaped. But the clock had started ticking, and neither she nor her polished lies could stop it now. James poured 2 fresh cups of coffee and slid one across the table to his son. "We play it smart," he said. "No anger. No mistakes." Ryan lifted the cup, meeting his father's gaze. "To justice," he said. "To patience," James replied. The sound of the cups clinking together was small, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of something larger, something inevitable. Outside, a breeze rustled the trees, carrying the last chill of the storm away. The house was quiet again, but the quiet no longer felt like loss. It felt like focus. And as James glanced at the stack of documents Jessica had left behind, a faint smile touched his lips. The game had finally begun. What came next would decide everything. The trap took 3 weeks to build, and less than 30 seconds to spring. Jessica's plan was precise, every step calculated, like a courtroom argument with no room for improvisation. Megan had made a career out of deceit, but arrogance was always the final flaw of people who thought they'd gotten away with everything. Jessica knew that. James and Ryan knew it too. And by the time the pieces were set, all that was left was to let her walk into her own downfall. They chose a downtown law office overlooking the city, neutral ground, respectable quiet. The kind of place that smelled like money and legitimacy, exactly the environment Megan trusted. Jessica had her firm's letterhead on every document, embossed seals, witness signatures, even a coffee tray with her name engraved on the carafe. The invitation to Megan came as an email from Moore & Associates, a simple message written in the cool professionalism she craved. "As executor of the Harper estate, we require your signature to release the inheritance funds tied to your late husband's assets. Appointment confirmed for Thursday, 10 a.m., she responded within 20 minutes. "Of course. I'll be there." The morning of the meeting, James sat across the street from the office, his hand steady on the wheel of a parked car. Beside him, Ryan adjusted his collar, the disguise subtle but effective. A clean-shaved, dark glasses, a charcoal suit enough to make him blend in, yet still him. Alive. "You don't have to do this," James said quietly. Ryan shook his head. "Yes, I do." Jessica's voice came through the earpiece, crisp and controlled. "She's on her way up. Elevator just hit the 4th floor. Showtime." Megan arrived exactly on schedule, stepping out of the elevator with that same manufactured poise she'd perfected for years. Her hair was pulled into a sleek knot, her nails the same pale pink she'd worn at the funeral. She carried a designer handbag, the same one she'd bought with the first insurance payment. Everything about her screamed composure, confidence, control. Jessica met her in the lobby, greeting her with a practiced warmth. "Mrs. Harper." "Thank you for coming." "It's Ms. Hollis now," Megan corrected smoothly, offering a tight smile. "But of course." Jessica led her to a glass conference room, the city skyline glittering behind them. On the polished table sat a thick stack of papers, each one perfectly aligned. Megan's eyes flicked to the top page, Final Inheritance Authorization. Her lips twitched in satisfaction. "So this is it?" she asked, settling into her chair. Jessica nodded. "Once you sign, the estate transfers are complete. A few formalities remain with the insurance company, but your legal claim will be undisputed." Megan crossed her legs, tapping a pen against her chin. "And the funds," Jessica smiled politely. "A wire transfer within 48 hours. For the next few minutes, Jessica guided her through the paperwork, her tone steady, professional, unthreatening. Megan skimmed the pages without truly reading, her focus too fixed on the endgame. She paused only once, glancing at Jessica with mild curiosity. "You handled Ryan's estate yourself?" Jessica nodded. "Yes. I was a friend of the family. It felt appropriate." Something flickered in Megan's eyes. Amusement, perhaps a touch of triumph. "How kind." Jessica leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. "It's what we do for those we care about." The words hung there, calm and precise, just long enough for tension to settle invisibly into the room. Then Jessica reached for her phone. "Before you sign, there's one last detail. My associate will bring in the secondary verification document. It requires both witness acknowledgement and next of kin confirmation." Megan frowned. "Next of kin? I thought I was the only one." Jessica's voice softened. "You were. Until now." The door opened. Megan's pen froze midair. Ryan stepped inside. For a moment, no one breathed. The city noise outside vanished, the air thick enough to drown in. Megan's eyes widened, first in disbelief, then horror, then something colder, calculation fighting panic. The color drained from her face. "Hello, Megan," Ryan said, his voice calm, steady, alive. Her chair scraped against the tile as she half stood. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "You're dead." Ryan tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "That's what you told them." Jessica rose from her seat, moving with the quiet authority of someone who had already won. "Please sit down, Ms. Hollis. Or should I say, Mrs. Harper. We wouldn't want to make this any messier than it already is." Megan's breathing quickened, her eyes darting toward the door. But before she could move, James appeared in the doorway. His presence was silent, but absolute, a storm contained within a man. Megan froze. "You," she breathed. "You were supposed to bury my son." James finished. "I remember." She backed away a step, her polished facade cracking. "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to go like that." "No," Ryan interrupted. "It went exactly how you planned. You just didn't plan for me to live." Jessica placed a folder on the table, flipping it open with deliberate care. "Let's make this official," she said, sliding the documents across. "Here's the insurance claim you forged, the bank transfers, and the signed confession from Mr. Caldwell, who, by the way, is in federal custody as of this morning." Megan's lips parted. He wouldn't. He did, Jessica said. Apparently loyalty expires when facing 20 years in prison. The silence that followed was suffocating. Outside the city carried on cars moving, people crossing streets unaware that justice was taking shape 20 stories above them. Megan's eyes flicked to Ryan again. You think this will fix it? You think anyone will believe you? Ryan stepped closer, sliding his phone onto the table. They don't have to believe me. They just have to believe this. He pressed play. From the speaker came her voice, clear, recorded, unmistakable. Once the paperwork clears, I'm free. He'll be gone and we'll have everything. Her own words filled the room like a verdict. Jessica folded her arms. That's called intent. It pairs nicely with attempted murder and insurance fraud. Megan stared at the phone, her pulse visible at her throat. You set me up. Jessica smiled faintly. No, you set the stage. We just turned on the lights. The door opened again. 2 officers entered quietly, their badges glinting under the ceiling lights. Megan didn't resist when they read her rights. She simply looked past them toward Ryan, her expression a twisted blend of disbelief and something close to admiration. You were smarter than I thought, she said softly. Ryan's eyes didn't waver. You should have thought harder. They led her out, her heels clicking down the hallway until the sound faded. The room fell into silence again. Jessica closed the folder, gathering the papers into a neat stack. It's over, she said. James looked at his son, then at the window. The sky outside was clear now, sunlight spilling across the city in long golden stripes. No, he said quietly. It's just done. Jessica gave a small nod. That's what justice feels like. Ryan exhaled the first real breath he'd taken since the day his life had burned away. Outside, the city moved on indifferent. But for the 3 of them, time slowed, the weight of weeks of fear, anger, and loss finally lifting. And somewhere down the corridor, the echo of Megan's heels marked the rhythm of a life that had just run out of lies. But what James didn't know, what none of them yet suspected, was that the story wasn't quite finished. Because as the elevator doors closed on Megan's face, she smiled. The air in the conference room felt heavier after the words left her mouth, like the walls themselves had drawn in a collective breath. Jessica stood at the head of the table, calm and deliberate, while the officers waited just outside the glass door. She had spent weeks building this moment, brick by brick, lie by lie, until the entire facade Megan had crafted now stood ready to collapse under its own weight. Ryan sat silent, hands clasped, eyes locked on the woman who had buried him in name, but not in truth. James stood behind him, unmoving, the kind of quiet presence that carried the weight of finality. Jessica slid the evidence folder open and spread it across the polished wood. Let's walk through this one more time, Ms. Hollis, she said, voice even sharp enough to cut through the hum of the air conditioner. This is the transfer request from Harper Life Insurance, the one you filed 3 days after your husband's accident. The policy was under Ryan Harper's name. Your signature here, she tapped the page with her pen, matches the forged authorization from the same account you opened under a false identity 18 months ago. Convenient timing, don't you think? Megan's knuckles whitened on the edge of the table. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice brittle, trembling at the edges. Jessica ignored her. Then there's the offshore account, she continued, laying out the next page. Boca Vista Holdings, registered in the Caymans. Transferred assets totaling $512,000, the exact payout amount from your husband's policy. Except, of course, Ryan Harper isn't dead, which makes this not a payout. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. It makes it theft. The silence was absolute. Megan's breath hitched, her composure unraveling one thread at a time. Jessica reached for the next piece of evidence, a flash drive. She plugged it into the laptop on the table and turned the screen toward Megan. And here, she said, clicking play, is the conversation between you and Mr. Caldwell, your so-called financial advisor. The room filled with sound, Megan's voice, unmistakable and clear, laced with arrogance. Once the paperwork clears, I'm free. He'll be gone and we'll have everything." Then Caldwell's reply, oily and amused. "You really think no one's going to notice?" And her answer, the one that made Ryan's jaw clench. "By the time they do, I'll be halfway around the world." Jessica paused the recording and leaned in slightly. "That's called intent, Ms. Hollis. Add in the fake death certificate, falsified police report, and witness tampering, and you're looking at a lifetime of consequences. But you already knew that." Megan's breathing quickened. Her eyes darted to Ryan, then to James, and finally back to Jessica. "This is ridiculous," she said, her tone rising. "You can't just—" The conference room door opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence filling the space with quiet authority. The younger one spoke first. "Megan Hollis." She froze. "You're under arrest for insurance fraud, conspiracy, and attempted homicide." Her chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood. "No," she said, shaking her head, voice breaking into disbelief. "You can't. I didn't." The officers moved forward, one reading her rights as the other reached for her wrists. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room like punctuation on a story years in the making. Ryan didn't move. He simply watched her, his face expressionless as if he were studying a stranger rather than the woman who once called herself his wife. Megan's gaze locked onto him, frantic now. "You set me up," she shouted. "You think this makes you the victim? You think you're innocent? You're nothing without me." Jessica stood, gathering the papers into a single neat stack. "He's alive without you," she said coolly. "That's more than you can say." The officers guided Megan toward the door, her protest shrinking into hollow echoes as they disappeared down the hallway. The sound of her voice faded, replaced by the low murmur of city noise outside, the honk of distant traffic, the hum of air vents, the tick of a clock on the wall. For a moment no one spoke. The silence felt like an ending, but not quite. It was heavier than triumph, quieter than relief. Then Jessica turned to Ryan. "You okay?" He nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Yeah," he said. "I think I finally am." James exhaled, leaning back against the wall. "I thought I'd feel angry," he said softly. "But I don't. Just finished." Jessica offered a faint smile. Justice has a way of doing that. Ryan's eyes followed the glass door where Megan had stood minutes earlier. She never thought she'd lose. She built everything on control. "And you took that away," Jessica said. "That's how people like her fall. They don't trip. They get pulled down by the weight of their own lies." Outside the window, the morning sun had broken fully through the clouds, flooding the city with clean, hard light, the kind that revealed everything. James watched the light stretch across the floor and thought of all the times he'd wondered if justice was real, if decency still meant something in a world that rewarded cruelty. For the first time in a long while, he believed it again. Ryan turned to Jessica. "What happens now?" "She'll make a deal," Jessica said. "People like her always do. But it won't matter. The money's frozen, the accounts are seized, and her reputation is ruined. By the time she realizes what she's lost, there'll be nothing left to fight for." Ryan nodded, his voice quiet. "Good." Jessica gathered her files and slipped them into her briefcase. "You two should go home," she said. "Get some rest. The hard part's over." As she left, James and Ryan lingered a while longer, letting the moment sink in. The room smelled faintly of ink and cold coffee, the remains of a long battle fought with precision and restraint. Finally, James spoke. "You know, your mother used to say the truth always finds its way home. I didn't believe her until now." Ryan looked at him, a faint smile breaking through. Guess she was right. They walked out together, the door swinging shut behind them with a soft click. Downstairs, the lobby buzzed with quiet chatter, the world moving on as if nothing monumental had just occurred 20 stories above. Outside, the streets gleamed from last night's rain, and the city air felt lighter somehow. As they reached the sidewalk, Ryan tilted his face toward the sunlight, eyes closed for a moment. "Feels different," he said. James glanced up too. "That's what freedom feels like." For a few steps they walked in silence side by side, the tension that had once bound them slowly dissolving into something calmer, something new. But behind them, far above in that same glass tower, Jessica stood at the window watching the two men disappear into the crowd. Her phone buzzed once in her hand. She checked the screen and her smile faded. The message was short. No sender name, just a number she didn't recognize. "You think it's over?" "It's not." She looked up at the skyline, her reflection cutting through the sunlight, and for the first time that day, she didn't feel certain anymore. The lake was quiet that morning, the kind of stillness that felt almost sacred. Mist floated low across the surface, curling and dissolving as the sun climbed higher over the Texas horizon. The water reflected the pale sky like a sheet of glass broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish brushing the surface. James sat at the edge of the old wooden dock, his boots planted firmly, a fishing rod resting in his hands. Beside him, Ryan leaned back in a folding chair, the brim of his hat pulled low, his eyes on the faint line that stretched out into the lake. It had been 6 months since the arrest. 6 months since that day in the glass office when the lies finally shattered. In the time that followed, there had been hearings, reporters, lawyers, paperwork, endless paperwork. But now here none of that mattered. The chaos had burned itself out. What remained was silence, the good kind, the kind that didn't weigh heavy anymore. The two men hadn't said much since arriving. They didn't need to. Sometimes peace didn't come with words. It came with the soft creak of the dock, the smell of pine, the gentle tug of wind against a fishing line. Ryan adjusted his reel. "You remember when you brought me here the first time?" he asked quietly, his voice breaking the calm without disturbing it. James smiled faintly. "You were 8. You tangled the line every 5 minutes. Swore the fish were avoiding you on purpose." Ryan chuckled. Maybe they were. He looked down at the water, the reflection of his face wavering like an echo. "Feels different now." "Everything does," James said. They sat in comfortable silence again. The birds started to sing somewhere beyond the trees, soft and distant. It had taken a long time for Ryan to recover from what Megan had done. Not just the attempt on his life, but the betrayal that lived in every corner of his memory. He'd spent months unraveling the damage, rebuilding what was left of his name, his finances, his sense of trust. Therapy had helped. So had work. But mostly it was this mornings like this one, quiet and honest with his father beside him, that had stitched him back together. James watched his son from the corner of his eye. He saw the changes that time and pain had carved into him, the new steadiness in his voice, the calm in his movements. Ryan had always been good, decent too, trusting for a world that thrived on taking advantage of people like him. But now there was something different about him. Not bitterness, not hardness, just awareness. The kind that came only from walking through hell and coming out with your soul intact. James cast his line again, the lure cutting cleanly through the water. "You ever think about her?" he asked. Ryan's answer came after a long pause. "Not really. Sometimes maybe. Not about her, about the way I let her in. How easy it was to ignore the warning signs. I guess I wanted to believe in her more than I wanted to see the truth." James nodded slowly. "We all do that. Sometimes the truth looks too ugly to face, so we convince ourselves it's something else. Guess I learned that the hard way." "Hard lessons stick the longest," James said. A small splash broke the quiet as Ryan's bobber dipped below the surface. He reeled in slow and steady, pulling up a small bass that wriggled against the hook. He smiled for the first time in a while, the kind of smile that wasn't forced. "Still got it," he said. James grinned. "Guess the fish finally forgave you." They laughed, and the sound carried across the lake light and easy. It had been a long time since either of them had laughed like that, not because they'd forgotten how, but because laughter had felt foreign in the shadow of everything that had happened. Now it came naturally again, unforced and earned. After a while, James set his rod down and looked out over the water. The reflection of the sun shimmered in long golden streaks, stretching toward them like a path. You know, he said, I used to think strength meant never breaking, just holding it all in, pushing through no matter what. Ryan turned to him. And now James's gaze stayed on the lake. Now I think real strength is knowing when to stand up, when to act. When someone you love is in danger and the world looks the other way, that's when it matters. Enduring's one thing, but doing something about it even when it costs you everything, that's the kind of strength that lasts. Ryan was quiet for a moment, then nodded. You saved me, Dad. James shook his head. No, we saved each other. A breeze drifted across the lake, warm and slow, carrying the scent of cedar and earth. The surface rippled again, scattering the sunlight into shards. Ryan leaned back, letting the wind brush against his face. You ever think we'll forget all of it? The worst parts, James thought for a moment. No, he said finally. But that's not the point. The point's to remember without living there. Pain's just proof you made it through. Ryan looked at him, his expression softening. You always know what to say. Comes with age, or with surviving. James smiled. Both, maybe. They sat in silence again, the kind that felt full instead of empty. The day stretched on, slow and forgiving. By the time the sun began to dip behind the tree line, the lake had turned to molten amber. Ryan reeled in his line one last time, unhooked the small fish, and let it slip back into the water. It darted away instantly, vanishing beneath the reflection of the sky. Funny, he said. Used to think fishing was boring. James chuckled. That's because you thought it was about catching something. Ryan turned toward him. And it's not? James shook his head. It's about waiting, about peace, about knowing that even if nothing bites, you're still here. Ryan smiled faintly. Guess I've had enough waiting for one lifetime. Then just enjoy the being here part. They packed up slowly, moving without hurry. The day had been long, but neither wanted to leave just yet. Before stepping off the dock, Ryan paused, looking back at the water. The reflection of the two of them shimmered side by side, a father and son, who'd been through the worst of storms and found calm on the other side. As they walked toward the truck, James glanced up at the sky, streaked with orange and violet. You know, he said, I used to wonder if peace was something you had to find. But I think it's something you build. Ryan looked over, curious. And how do you build it? James smiled, opening the truck door. One choice at a time. The engine started rumbling softly as the lake faded behind them. Fireflies had begun to flicker in the tall grass, tiny sparks of light against the coming dark. For the first time in a long while, the road ahead looked open, simple, and good. But as the truck turned the corner and disappeared down the dirt road, a single ripple spread across the surface of the lake, small, deliberate, as if something unseen had just surfaced beneath. The water smoothed again, silent and still, leaving behind only the fading echo of two men who had finally earned their peace. Life has a way of testing what we're made of, not through comfort, but through loss, betrayal, and the moments when silence feels heavier than words. This story reminds us that true strength isn't about how much pain we can endure, but how we choose to respond when everything we love is at risk. Sometimes standing up for what's right means walking through darkness with your head held high. Other times it means forgiving yourself for the mistakes you made when you didn't know better. For those who've lived long enough to understand both love and loss, peace isn't something found, it's something built. One honest decision at a time. You don't need revenge to heal. You need courage to act, wisdom to wait, and the grace to let go. Because in the end, what defines a life well lived isn't what broke you, but what you rebuilt after the storm. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories of wisdom, justice, and redemption, because every ending carries a lesson worth remembering.